Hi, this is for Professor Amabile, probably over here, to your left. Over here. Maybe I should stand, yes. I read Dan Pink's work a couple years ago in Drive, which is about mastery, legacy, and autonomy. I was intrigued by the progress principle. I was wondering if you could help sort of reconcile the two. They're not contradictory, but I feel like there's a bridge, and what you're talking about is very similar to the three things that he lays out in what drives us and motivates us in general, and specifically at the workplace.
In Dan Pink's wonderful book, he talks about mastery, autonomy, and purpose being really important for drive, for motivation. And that's incredibly compatible with what we found. In fact, Dan Pink talks about much of my research in his book. So what we discovered as the power of making progress on meaningful work is essentially Dan Pink's notion of purpose. That is meaning. Feeling that you're doing something that contributes to something that you value. And the idea of mastery is essentially equivalent to feeling that you're making progress, that you're getting somewhere, having an effect that's positive on the world. So all of that fits together, and autonomy, we found, is one of the main catalyzers of meaningful progress. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
I had a quick question for Chuck and then a more serious one for Dr. Raisin. You've played with everybody. Is there anybody left that you still want to play for professionally or personally? And the more slightly serious question, it seems like the principles that you're working on, the government and politics in general, are working against that. They seem to revel in dividing and conquering us to perpetuate that. How do we force these improvements into politics?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've been very blessed in my career to work with a lot of very, very talented artists, and I just feel so fortunate for that. That's been the joy of my career, I think, is to be able to dance with these different partners. You know, if you're successful in one band or with one artist, that's a great thing, but it's just been a joy for me to dance around with all these different guys. The most recent one is John Mayer. I've been recording with John, and hopefully we'll be touring with him next year. He's trying to sort out his schedule and figure out when he's going to go out. You know, I've done brief stints with some folks that I'd like to play more with. I played with Sting once on a one-off show in the San Francisco area, but I've always admired his music, and you know, if he called me for a recording, I wouldn't turn it down. And gosh, I don't know. There's just, I think there's a lot more to come, and I just wait for the phone to ring, man. That's all.
Well, and in answer to your question, yes, you're right. But you know, the world's a paradoxical place, and one of the strangest experiences I've had in the last 6 months, in fact, I told the folks that I was just completely befuddled by it, was I got an invitation to go to Brooke Army Medical Center, which is the major place where they're dealing with the disasters of these wars. And it turns out the government has mandated that health care for returning vets include complementary and alternative strategies. And of course, when the government mandates it, it has to be done. So here I was in this bastion of sort of militarism, and I had what was probably the most intense and fascinating discussion I've ever had about compassion meditation with these healthcare workers and scientists who were actually wondering whether some of these things, certainly they were extremely interested in these ideas for people coming back from the wars. You know, one of the problems with a terrorist war is it's going to be less likely that you're going to actually be able to come face to face with folks in the future, so the need to do it internally is more powerful. But there was this real fascinating discussion about the potential for the compassionate warrior, and whether or not, if you trained people before they went off to war and something like this, would it make it impossible for them to shoot people? You know, one of the problems the military has is most people will not kill. And even soldiers, when they really look to see who's really killed people, they're terrible at it. You know, people will avoid that. And so it's true that the military has a strategy often of doing the opposite, of dehumanizing the enemy. But it's an amazing conversation about, if you did this ahead of time, would you in fact, maybe you wouldn't kill as many people, but would you become more rational about how you did it? So the point is, I think it's what whoever said about, you know, things never change unless it's economically viable. I think you said that, Chuck, you know. It's in the same way, part of the challenge that we have in helping people think about these alternative strategies is to show that there actually is simple benefits that people can understand, whether it's in education, whether it's in the military. And we're just at the beginning of this, but that's my thought on that, is that you show people how it can benefit their bottom line, and it often becomes very acceptable very quickly.
My question is for Dr. Sharon. How do you find balance with the data-driven medicine that's kind of sweeping medicine today and very much all about numbers? And I think misinterpreted might have doctors saying they don't have time for narrative, or they're more interested in meeting some kind of number-based metric.
Yes, thank you for the question about data. Stories are data too. Stories are the source of the most powerful evidence, which is usually squandered in the transaction, so that we feel that the training that we give to clinicians helps them to capture that which otherwise will be lost. We love the numbers too, and the outcomes, and the evidence. And we love the electronic records too, because they save time at doing some of the things that used to be very time-consuming, so that we can use the time we have more effectively. So, you know, I don't take a whole lot longer, if at all, with patients in the office. I use the time differently. And the first question, how many grand rounds do I give in this, all over the place? The first question is always, Dr. Sharon, who's got the time to write stories, you know? And I feel very confident, because we've done enough outcome studies to know that with these skills, things go very much more quickly and more productively. So the data are our friend. The electronic record is our friend. We have to make sure that no doctor in the world ever looks at the computer screen instead of looking at the patient who's sitting next to him or her. Once we have that hurdle passed, I think the combination of the narrativity and the prodigious data-driven evidence will make us healthier.
I had a question for Chuck and John as well. I know that in music and entertainment and performance, that dissonance is oftentimes part of balance, and I was hoping that, if possible, you could share one of the greatest examples of that, of dissonance in your careers, that kind of brought balance. And the speakers, other speakers, by all means, if you have an example, please do share. Thank you.
I'm way into dissonance, man, I'll tell you. No, I think it is, you're right, it is very much a part of the balancing act, because, you know, if everything's lovely and melodic and wonderful and harmonious, it doesn't really tell the whole story, does it? And interesting, I just came from Germany, and I did a wonderful show with this fabulous band. It's a 15-piece brass orchestra called the HR Big Band out of Frankfurt. Just marvelous players. And I asked them to do a chart for Statesboro Blues, which is, you know, a song we used to do with the Allman Brothers. And, you know, they did, and it had this incredible dissonance in the beginning of it. And I thought, man, how cool is that? You know, rather than just to play it the normal way that we would have, you know, either with the Allmans or when I do it on my own. And it really provided another dynamic for me, and looked at the song a completely different way. So I think it's a very important part of music and life.
As a spectator, I could illustrate a production of Swan Lake, one of the traditional white ballets, and a choreographer, an English gentleman. His name is Matthew Bourne, and he used the Tchaikovsky score, you know, from 1875, and told his story. And the story was, you know, very provocative in some ways, but it's an all-male cast. So that's an example of stepping away from the typical or, you know, some things are kind of revered. And we use that term sacred cow, perhaps sometimes. And, you know, Matthew Bourne's company is called Motion Pictures. So he kind of takes things from a different perspective. And it just played in City Center, New York last November for a whole month. So it's obviously very enthusiastically embraced. And Twyla Tharp's just doing a world premiere for us full evening. And she's been well known, of course, for deconstructing. So.
Hi, I had questions for both Chuck and John as well. Chuck, being so passionate about conservationism, how have you used your influence, if at all, with celebrities to bring them over to your cause?
Well, I'm very happy and proud to say that there's a lot of activism within the entertainment industry, not just in music. Jack Johnson comes to mind. He has a solar-powered studio. Jack's a surfer, so he has a passion for oceans and waterways and such. The Indigo Girls from here in Atlanta come to mind. You know, they've been very active in environmental causes. They use biodiesel in their buses when they tour. Willie Nelson is a prime example. He does the same thing and has set the standard with Farm Aid and also with his biodiesel efforts. Leonardo DiCaprio is an actor, Brad Pitt. They've all done wonderful things, not just for the environment, but I think also for humanity as a whole. And I think it's a good thing. I also think it can go too far sometimes, and bless his heart, Bono is a fantastic entertainer, but you know, when you start preaching sometimes from the podium where you're supposed to be singing, I think it can go a little bit overboard. So I certainly try to be careful about it in keeping performance and discussion about the passions for environment and other matters a little bit separated.
Thank you. And John, as someone who has a child at Atlanta Ballet Center, and also someone who is planning on attending the New York City Ballet's premiere of Ocean's Kingdom next week with Paul McCartney writing the music and Peter Martin's doing the choreography. I didn't know you mentioned Twyla Tharp, but what other interesting collaborations does Atlanta Ballet have coming up?
Wow. She's not in our marketing department either. Thanks for asking. We have an English choreographer, Wayne McGregor, who the English just awarded him the Commander of the British Empire. Hello, I mean, a choreographer getting Commander of the British Empire. I always saw a guy on a horse with a sword. So that's what they think of, you know, Wayne McGregor. It's called Eden Eden, and the music is Steve Reich, and it's about Dolly, the sheep. You know, Dolly was the, yeah, so, yeah, there you go, the clone sheep. So ballet isn't always Swan Lake, even male Swan Lake. It's about a clone sheep. The Twyla Tharp world premiere is a full evening premiere, opens February 10th. She has 13 children from the dance center in the ballet. She's 70 years old now and just as creative and as rambunctious, and we all just run around in circles trying to keep up with her. And we have other world premieres. In fact, we have all world premieres at the end of the season, so lots and lots of great stuff going on at Atlanta Ballet. Thanks again.
This is less a question than sort of a selfish, starstruck request, but I'm probably not alone. Would you play one more?
So this is a song from a record I did called Southscape a couple of records back. Those of us that live and grew up in the South, I think, have a deep passion for it, and so this was my attempt to try to paint a picture of it musically here. It's called Southscape.